Okay, good evening, everybody. Deep dive number 8, I believe. And we're going to have 2 topics tonight. One is going to be reviewing the team's sheltering best practices, a little mini document that we've been putting together. Kayla's spearheading that, so she'll talk that. And then I have about a 30-minute, depending on how fast we whiz through it, 30 to 40-minute presentation on the tools we have now available and compiled for doing outreach to whole communities in a guidebook. And so we're going to walk through the guidebook. So let's do a quick around the rooms because we can do that. And I'm just going to go, it'll be Vance, Gabrielle, Ann, and then Kayla, Frank, and Pauline. So Vance, can you talk or are you going to have to chat type?
Try, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I think the volume was down. Anyway, nothing to add. I'm just sitting in.
And what neighborhood?
Oh, Hawthorne Hills.
Okay, Gabrielle.
Gabrielle Gerhard, in the Windermere North area, and our hub is called the Windermere North Sandpoint Hub.
Ann?
Ann Forrest. I'm in Victory Heights, which is in Northeast Seattle, and I try and help the North Side communicate, all the North hubs.
I forgot me, Cindy Barker, Morgan Junction Hub, and then Kayla, Frank, and Pauline.
I'm Kayla. I am with the Highland Park Hub in West Seattle.
I'm Frank. I'm with the Magnolia Hub in Central West or Miqua.
Pauline, Greenwood Hub in North Seattle.
And then I'm going to pick on people who I can see are not muted. And so we'll do Laura, and then Ann, and then Jeff, and then Bill.
Okay, I'm Laura Kett, and I'm from in Ballard and with the Time Peepatch Hub.
Hey, Ann, Jeff, and Bill.
Hi, I'm Ann Bond, and I'm in the East Lake Hub. And I'm putting you guys on mute and getting off the screen because I'm going to eat off screen.
That's fine. Jeff?
I'm Jeff Snyder, Maple Leaf South Hub.
Okay, and then after Bill, we're going to have Louise, Matt, Patty McKee, and Erica. So Bill?
Yeah, excuse me. This is Bill with the Queen Anne Hub at the Queen Anne Playfield, as well as the Miqua Hubs organization in Central West.
Louise Luthi, Laurelhurst, Northeast Seattle.
Hi, Louise.
Hey, Vance.
Long time no see.
Yeah.
And then Matt, Patty, and Erica.
Matt Blank from Ravenna Hub, Northeast Seattle. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, and Patty McKee from Sandpoint, Windermere, Northeast Seattle.
And Erica.
Erica Arnett, Highland Park Hub.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go jumping straight in because it'll be a full evening tonight. And I will warn people, I'm on my laptop, which I don't normally run these meetings from. So there may be some fumbling and squinting at the screen and stuff like that. So Mike Ruby, who's joining us, is from Wallingford. So we'll go ahead. Kayla, go ahead and start.
Are you sharing the document or am I?
No, I'm sharing it right now. Okay. There we go.
Perfect. Okay, so this is our best attempt at a community just-in-time practices for sheltering. So just a little bit of background. The way this kind of came about is we've had some realizations, and Cindy's had a few community groups who have decided to I guess randomly stand up shelters for various reasons without a lot of guidelines. And so we recognized that there was this gap between running a shelter from the government standpoint to running a shelter at the community level and what that looks like. And so what we did was we looked at some different, what's that? I thought I heard something. We looked at different best practices. I had previously put together an almost 300-page sheltering plan for the city of Renton. And so we tried to take some of the high-level, super important things and distill them down into this document. And one of the things we did was made it kind of a checklist form. So it's a worksheet, if you will, of tasks and actions that need to be completed. So here on the first page, you have kind of a little intro and thanking people. There are 5 sections. And so each one of those sections is spelled out on that first page. So if you're looking for something specific, you can just look at this first page, almost kind of like a table of contents, get the highlights, and then flip to each section. So these are the areas that we thought were most important. And when we were designing this document, the people we had in mind were community members who had zero knowledge of sheltering, but had space and possibly a desire to use their space to shelter people following a catastrophic incident. So some of the things we know is that from previous deep dives is that City of Seattle has said it'll take them 7 days at least as their best prediction to stand up a shelter. And so if we were to have a large earthquake, you have, from day 0 to 7 where the community is going to have to fill the gaps. So the areas that we thought were most important were facility inspection and making sure the space was safe and considering all of the different things that you would possibly need to think about before opening. And some of that was based on, like I said, some of the lessons learned from some community groups already engaging in this work. How to set up the shelter, just in very general terms. We want it to be accessible and equitable. And so there's different ADA requirements and recommendations sprinkled throughout, as well as language access. And then the high level, how to operate your shelter, the different roles, the things that you need to do to basically keep your shelter running. And then if you have the ability, feeding people and what you need to do. And then we still will now be able to add a statement of liability or the new Good Samaritan law now that it's been updated. So on this second page here, you'll see the way we broke it out. I'm hoping you guys had an opportunity. We sent it out a couple weeks ago to take a look. But we tried to break it out in an easy to use format where you could literally go down the page and look for whatever it is that you're possibly looking for, and then go through and check things off. So we wanted information to be quick and accessible and easy to find. So you can see here, right, when thinking about your shelter, what kind of shelter are you going to be? Is your building safe? Can you feed people? How are you going to staff it? So don't open a shelter and then go, well, shoot, I didn't realize I had to be here 24/7. Now who do I call on, right? Think about those things ahead of time. And then, of course, how to keep people safe. Section 2 is, again, another prior to opening a shelter. It's important to do these things. So where to set up the different areas in a shelter. And again, this is all based on like best practice documents. And we recognize that not everybody is going to have space that's going to work for this layout. So for example, someone may just have a giant like gym. And so they may not have a quiet area or a children's area or whatever, but we put those things in there in the event that they do. So these aren't a must do in every situation. It's just a do what you can, trying to capture as many space types as possible. Section 3, again, we talked about signage, internal, external, and both. We added some ADA type recommendations about how high to put the signs off the ground and whatnot. Again, section D, here's where you're going to learn all the different roles and responsibilities and who has to do what, who fills out what form. We do have forms that are still under construction. So yes, the different tasks, it talks about enlisting people to help in the shelter. So if you have people who are staying in your shelter, how can you use them to accomplish some of these things? And then feeding. And again, it's some high level things about feeding. There's a lot of, in the beginning, a lot of reference to how the hubs can help you. And one of the things that's mentioned is we might be able to help find a resource for food. And so there's some high level, like, if, don't serve bad food. Make sure you're doing it right. We don't need, a second, the disaster after the disaster when you give everyone food poisoning. And so that at a high level, without going line by line, is essentially this document. And so where we're at with it is, this was primarily myself, Gabrielle, Vance, and Cindy who worked on this portion. Frank and Margaret have offered to look at it and provide us some more in-depth feedback and some editing for content and grammar. And then we have a whole group of folks that have offered to share this in the community and get feedback. So Luis, Cindy, and Margaret. And then Anne, of course, is helping us incorporate this into the book somehow. So I want to make sure, I don't think I forgot anyone, but if I did, I'm really sorry. Speak up and tell me so that you get recognition as well. But where we're at with this right now is just seeking general feedback on how it looks. Does it make sense? You guys too, I assume, know nothing about sheltering. What question marks, what questions do you have, or question marks can you put next to things that we can clarify before we send it to our editors and then to our community folks for feedback? So we can take feedback now. And then, of course, I did say in the email that I sent that we would be collecting feedback through, I think I said next Thursday, the 20th, 22nd or 20th. And so we can incorporate your feedback if you have any questions about this document or how it was created, or when you were reading through it, anything that you felt needed additional clarification. And again, this doesn't, and we say this in the introduction, this does not even kind of begin to scratch the surface of all of the complexities and the dynamics of running a shelter. But this is a good starting point. The rest is just kind of, you're going to have to figure it out. Unfortunately, right? So otherwise, I'll give you a 280-page book and you can read that.
No. So questions for Kayla, or should I stop sharing? I'm afraid to stop sharing in case somebody says, I was confused on page 6. All right, I'm going to stop sharing so we can all see each other.
I thought it was an incredible document, really user-friendly, really easy to follow. And I would be the person that you come up to and I'd say, what do you mean a shelter? So that's the kind of user I would be. And so I don't have questions because once again, you have to have experience to understand what's missing before you know it's missing. But I would be comfortable with this. I would feel like it at least informed me enough when I started that I could make a somewhat decent decision about going forward or not on different parts of sheltering.
Yeah,
That's good feedback. Thank you.
Yes, thank
And
you.
I've also contacted the pastor at St. Stephen's, and he is on board to review it, and he has had disaster experience as well, and he knows the deadline. I said it's a little tighty, so
well, I think
go with that.
The Hub Captains is the 20th. I haven't even given it to my 2 community partners, so there's a little bit of buffer there.
So yeah,
Well,
he can have more time.
Deadlines have a point though, because most people go to the deadline. So whatever it is,
yeah.
So it's fine. It's
awesome.
Anybody else? Oh, that's great. We'll collect those written comments and we'll stitch it in, and then, like Kayla said, going out to the community groups who we want to do this with. We also, of course, will send it to the city. We have to kind of sync up with one of their schedules around sheltering. So, we'll just keep moving on it. Anybody else?
The only comment I have is just want to format. What I got emailed to me was 10 pages long, and I kind of condensed it down to 6. I think there could be maybe a little bit more better layout to make it not so many pages, but it has nothing to do with content. It just has to do with the layout. And I assume that maybe that's because it's still under development, but that was just one comment I had.
Yeah, I think the 10-page document was an early development. I think it's now down to 6 7 in its current format as a checklist. The initial document was very very verbose. So
Yeah, we stripped out a lot of the why you're doing this and just put in the what to do.
Yeah, I agree with that too, because it has to be something you can actually work with in the field and not plow through a lot of verbiage. You need a lot of verbs in there, and the checklist is excellent.
yeah.
You can build that out as you need to locally.
Well, and we tried to keep each section, so there's five sections. I think 1 or 2 bleed over a teeny tiny bit to another page, but we tried to keep all the checklists about a page long for that purpose. So if you only needed to know about feeding, here's feeding in 1 page.
Yeah, the idea was to have page breaks between each section so we could tear off, the 5 sections and give them to 5 people if need be.
Right, and then,
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah.
Okay, I mean, what I got through my email and when I opened it, it was like 10 pages long. So I don't know what you have finished or sent out, but that's what I got.
Yeah, well, when we do it, it'll be in a PDF, so your computers won't be able to do weird things too. That's also a possibility.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, I think we're good. Thank you for the inputs. If you have any written stuff, get that back to Kayla. If you find little tweaks or something that, it's just you wanted to note wording changes or stuff like that. Okay, last call for anybody else. Okay, so my next thing will be doing this whole community tool set that we've got. And I'm scared because this was what I came upstairs early to go through one more time. And now I've had to shift over to my laptop, which is smarter than I am. So I'm not even sure I remember how to do this. Are you guys seeing this presentation?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I can see it. It's
Great.
Captain's
it's
deep
just got the
dive.
title at the top.
Just the title page, right? Ah, geez. Wait, I
Yeah.
just lost the presentation. There we go.
No, I still see it.
Okay. Oop, I've got a hair trigger. So hang on, because I'm trying to get this big enough where I can actually see it without losing you. So this is a pleasant change. I can actually see you and I've got the presentation. So these are the contents within the guidebook. And I honestly, I've been in a couple of meetings lately where people have said, I don't send this deep stuff out ahead of time because people just sit and flip through it when you're trying to tell them what's in it. And so this would be one of those. It's got a lot of dense writing in it because it really is a reference guide. So this is what the title, the table of contents looks like. So it's really around, it's kind of a linear approach to if you're going to do a meeting or an event, we touch on demographics, I'll cover that. But then if you're thinking about having a meeting, what should you be considering? And then what are tools to get you through the invitation and doing the outreach? And then all the tools to do an effective presentation or meeting. And then when you end it, there's some considerations we don't often think about. And then we have a section on virtual events, which we're all becoming experts at here. So tonight we're really going to just kind of, we've got folks who have not been on some of the previous deep dives. So I'm going to do a little short reminder of what we talk about in community dimensions when we talk about whole community, and then specifically what are the tools. And then sometimes when we have those discussions about what kind of outreach are you doing or what kind of tools you're using, the second part of your brain should be going, and if I'm activated as a hub, those same people are going to come to my hub. And so, well, when I plan an event, I can have pre-planning and know what to do. If this happens in a disaster, how would I handle that exact same dimension of a person who shows up at my hub? And then the last thing is, because this is just gigantically overwhelming, if you try and really think you're going to outreach to your whole community, if you live in a particularly diverse area, pick one thing, just pick one thing. Oh, Louise, your cat's in the way. That was funny. I heard the cat and I was like, of all the people I can see, I saw the cat. So Ann is working on a project with the Neighborhood Matching Fund to get us our video, which is going to be translated into different languages, and some of our outreach that's more accessible. And so part of that was some of the hubs that we funded for equipment. We said, we're going to really make a concerted effort to take those hubs and look at their demographics. And when we do the grand opening, make sure we do outreach that works out to those communities in particular. And so what I'm showing you here is the set. There's 7 pieces of demographic information that we ran for those 5 new hubs. And so I've got this set up so it's pretty easy to do. And, you know, we've gone through the tools of how to do it before, but it's just helps you look and go, well, who lives in my neighborhood? And then what languages are spoken in my neighborhood? Because we've definitely done those practices of, you know, what happens if you get X kind of, you know, speaker in your neighborhood, you know, how fast can you get interpreters in? And so this is Roosevelt. So this is one of the new ones. And it just, you know, it's just giving her a picture of the snapshot of her community. And then these demographics are around our discussions about, you might have elderly people, or you might have a lot of children. That's the one in the upper left-hand corner. There is demographics available about people with disabilities, although we're continually reminded that somebody reporting disabilities is not a natural thing. My mom, who's hard of hearing, would never think to call herself disabled. And that's the kind of logic it requires. And so this is kind of just, you know, people who are aware of the importance of providing that information. So it helps with what the city does in its planning purposes. Down in the bottom left is renters and homeowners. And we always talk about how hard it is to do outreach to renters. So look at the proportion in Roosevelt. They have a brutal job, you know, where 75% of their population is rental. And then the economic challenges is about the only way we can see if there's, you know, if we speculate that people who live at the economic margins are least likely to put away food, you know, and we might be wanting to make sure we're looking for food sources to match up for people, you know, just an indicator of maybe what that population might show you in your neighborhood. So those are the demographics that can help you then go, I'm going to do outreach, and I want to make sure at my event, I advertise for renters, and I have a lot of seniors. And so maybe I want to think about hearing or some other thing that might pop up and be ready to provide that for the meeting. And then the language thing, there's concentrations and there's scatterings. And so you just have to look at your neighborhood and see what has shown up. But these are the top 7 languages that in our Neighborhood Matching Fund, we committed to translating things into. And so they're kind of the go-to languages, but we recognize that there's, you know, over 130 other languages spoken in the Seattle school districts. So this, in your guidebook, I put this in with all the hyperlinks so you can see that every one of these right now, as of April, all these links are work, and I'll have to keep going through this document on a regular basis. City of Seattle is pretty good about not breaking people's links, but there's, you know, all the snapshot and demographic stuff that we've walked through, the link to the equity indicator maps, so that you can show if the city is thinking that your area is at, especially in terms of displacement and equity factors, if they're at high risk, a high vulnerable neighborhood. And then the last the last 2 links are around, if you end up with a high Vietnamese population in your neighborhood and you're curious about what are the cultural norms that would be good to learn about that community, because you're going to be dealing with folks a lot, there's some help aids, because there's so many different cultures. I get mine mixed up. There's multiple East African communities and they're all very different. You know, some are Muslim, some are not. So it's good to know that sort of stuff before you stick your foot in your mouth. Questions on this? I have to get the lint off my glasses here. So that whole set of tools will just help you, you know, think about who's in your neighborhood. So now we're going to move into, what do you have to consider when you're doing your actual meeting and an actual event? And I have a go-to place. There's a couple places around me that are really easy for me to get to, easy to set up. I'm familiar with them, but they, each of them has some flaws. And so I really have to think about, is this close to transit? Who is this a citywide thing? And that's a big deal where I've got to have parking and transit available. If you have people who who are going to be senior or want to use a lot of handicap, do you have that available? There's kids, working families need to bring their kids sometimes, and there are some populations who won't go to a meeting unless they're able to bring their kids. And so that and the time of event, how are you helping to reach your working population? And then there's going to be a lot of discussion later on language and translation. So I took the hyperlinks off because they blow it up. But so these are the set of tools that are available that not many of us realize for doing meetings in City of Seattle. There's a whole separate sheet on how to do separate meetings. There's an Office of Aging, Senior Affairs or Aging. Anne might be able to remind me what it is, but they have a whole set of what they call it age and disability friendly events and checklists so that as you walk through, you can go, yes, they can get up to the second floor because there's an elevator, and yes, there's restrooms up here too, thinking about all the needs of your participants. To find available venues, there are multiple lists and they're not well known. And so it's really handy. There's one called Space Finder and it's citywide, and you go on it and you say, I'm looking for a space of 60 people, and it'll pop up in your neighborhood if anybody has come to their site. This is a city sponsored site, and registered their venue. Not all of those are free. A lot of people are trying to, they'll charge maybe $30, $60 for use of the venue. So you just have to look and figure out what you're doing. The parks venues will also charge you. But they have a lot of different and very good meeting areas. The community centers are the ones that for sure will charge. The public libraries, those are all free, and that's all online, and it's very easy to get in and go. I have five neighborhood library branches in West Seattle here. And so even if I'm just doing a meeting for 10 people, I can use that tool and line it up as a calendar and go, well, which of these 5 has a room open for when I want to meet? It's a very handy little tool. And the last one is, if you are planning an event where you're going to have people with hard of hearing, people with hearing aids, it's a very nice feature to be able to have, and somebody's typing, so watch out there for mute off if you're going to type. The loop locations are buildings that have a hearing amplification wire built into the room. And so most modern hearing aids let people come into the room and they'll say, loop friendly, and they just have to flick their hearing aid to a setting. And now that your speech, if you're speaking into a microphone, is amplified right into their ear, and they're not having to strain to hear the speakers up on the wall. So that's a very handy thing. Not a lot of them. And we really, there's several community leaders who've been saying, we really need to ask the city to put more of those in, especially their common rooms. Question?
Cindy, what's the name of that thing you just referred to? The actual.
It's called the Loop system.
Thank you. Okay.
LOOP.
Got it. Thanks.
Other questions? Uh-oh. Every time I drink, I risk it going down the wrong way. So invitations and outreach, now that you've sort of gotten where you're going to do and who you're inviting and what you're thinking of, when you do your invitations, use plain language. And that's for many reasons. We have people who are new English speakers, make it so they can read them. Writing in plain language makes you get your point across. It's, it doesn't make you create long, fluffy descriptions that everybody tunes out of and then is surprised when they show up because they didn't read the whole thing and they didn't know what they were coming for. When you do your invitations, part of this list here, this is one of the tools. It's kind of a cribbing from the Department of Neighborhoods to think of who you're going to send invitations to. If you're doing a particularly targeted outreach, then, that's okay. Like maybe you're doing a special kid event, you kind of have limited it down to, I'm doing outreach to kids. But often, if you're just trying to get everybody in the neighborhood at the table, you forget that some of these organizations can be tools to be used where you send them and say, put this in your weekly newsletter or put this on your webpage for us or send it out in your calendar to help you reach the people who don't typically show up at your meetings or our events. And here's the other half of that list. You know, it just goes on and on and on. If you are particularly saying, okay, I've decided I'm going to reach out to the Spanish speakers in my neighborhood this year, you know, knowing that there's advocacy groups. Oh, geez. Hang on, I'm going to mute and give it a good cough and then come back. There's advocacy groups. There's people who are connected with the special interest that can help you get to those people. And down at the bottom, there are several neighborhoods that have local community radio stations. So don't forget, just there's all different ways to do outreach. And one of the things that really isn't on here, I don't think, is social media. And so in your campaign, you sort of have to be ready to say, here's the words, right? Send it out, and however you do that. But if you're able to prepare something to go on social media, to go out on that organization's Twitter feed, or to be posted on that organization's website, think about, you know, the invitation in several formats, you know, typical Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can advertise ethnic media. There'll be a tool link in here to all the ethnic media in Seattle, which you would be very surprised at all the different connected communities that are out there. And then when you are doing the invitations, you have to have at least thought about enough about what's going to happen at your event so that you can say, we'll have food. And then the dynamics that go along with food, which is not just vegan nut allergies to, you know, the cultural dimensions of it, which is, do we have pork? Do we have vegetarian food? Do we, you know, how do we serve it? Is it all finger food? So if you've targeted a particular area that you're looking at, find out what's traditional and expected. And then you have to be, you have to be ready for translating into those. And then the last section on here is also for access and functional needs, the tools to help you say, well, what's universal design to get into my building? You know, what's universal design around the communication, you know, as much graphics as you can use. And so this is the list of tools that you have that are for writing the invitations and thinking through your outreach. Publicizing your group, the Department of Neighborhood's got a tip sheet on that. Plain language guidelines. And we used to write to 12th grade level, you know, sort of like if you're really going to be evil, you would write at a 12th grade level. And then for about 5 or 6 years, it was 8th grade level. And recently it's more like, yeah, more right to 4th, 5th, or 6th grade level when you do outreach and communications. So that plain language helps you get down to the right level. There is a video that is worth watching, and it's put on by the Universal Design, I think it was the Coalition for Disabilities. And they put on an event where they had different people talking about a person in a wheelchair saying, this is what a good event looks like for me. Here's what the planner bakes into this event so that I can navigate and be a natural participant. You know, you're trying to remove any of the barriers to participation. There's a link to how to create accessible online documents, because we're learning that if you post it on a website or you sent it out in email, if you have a blind person who's trying to read that, you have to have it written in a certain, you know, created in a format that lets their screen reader read it correctly to you. And so that's kind of like one of those advanced skills where once you learn it, you'll just do all your documents that way. But it's really important to the person, because if their reader skips lines and they can't get to the line that has the date on it, it's not doing them any good. And then because we talk a lot about, you might want to translate your flyer into a language, where would you go to get that done? And so all of us who are starting to do that are learning, you know, what's it cost? How long does it take? So we'll continue to build this out. So questions on the tools and invitations outreach section. So I'm not going to kill this because it's a lot of the same dimensions, but at the event, you know, you are going to be working with people that are not your typical audience. And so that raises the stress level the first time you do it because you're just afraid of, you know, making the mistake or having not thought of something. Just you're trying to do your best, be natural and friendly about it. If you are very tense and artificial in talking to this new group of people, you know, people feel like an academic's talking to them. So just the way you give your presentation that way. And then take the lead from the interpreter if you're using an interpreter, and they'll help you walk through. Of course, mom wants to call right during the meeting. They'll walk you through how to break it up into short enough chunks. And this is where you could go back to our deep dive where we did the lesson with the interpreters, you know, to refresh on all those good tips. Using the simple language in your presentation. I actually sat at a presentation, it was the police department, and they were giving a presentation to East African community, and they had an interpreter, and they used words that even I didn't understand. The organizer and I afterwards went, did you even know what that word was? So think of the poor translator who is trying to do this for her community, and you don't need to make them make their brains work super hard. Use just plain simple language and don't use the jargon and acronyms that we're so used to using. When you come to doing, if you have to use, if the loop system isn't enough and you're going to use American Sign Language interpreters, there's different ways to do that. And so this tool set will talk you through how all these different things work and the different tools that you can get to use those.
So Cindy, one thing that we do frequently, you know, doing presentations, all of us, we either have a question and answer period at the end or during the presentation. So, you know, having worked in ESL for years, I usually confer with the interpreter and say, you know, are people going to ask questions during it? Are people uncomfortable asking questions through an interpreter, et cetera, et cetera? So please let them know on your own when we start how we do Q&A here, either during or after. It's completely acceptable to do. We don't want you to go through when you don't understand a term or a concept because there could be other people also not understanding that term or concept. So don't wait till the end to be frustrated.
Yeah, and they're very appreciative of that because I've seen meetings where that's, you know, said, you know, stop us if we've, you know, lost it. And because they have an interpreter and they can communicate, they're happy to use that interpreter to say, wait a minute, we didn't understand that. And let me finish this thought. When you have sometimes I've been at meetings where one side of the room is one language and the other side of the room is another language. So when you're doing the Q&A, you do have to go, well, who has a question? And so you go, that side of the room, ask a question. So the Vietnamese, they speak to the translator says it to you. Over here, as soon as this person hears the question, they're saying it back to them. So you can't give the answer until that side of the room got the question. Then you can give the answer and then both interpreters give it back to their groups. Right. So it becomes a dance and you know, we all mess it up the first time, but you'll get used to that. But because they know you're trying, like Frank said, they will engage. So, you know, if they have any interest at all, and you just have to pace it so that everybody gets it. Louise, was that you that had a question? Somebody asked.
No, it was Kayla. I was just going to add something to your cultural engagement piece. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's really helpful is when you're talking about things is to be very descriptive about what you're talking about. So for example, there was an incident in South America where there was going to be a volcanic eruption in the Lahar, and there was no concept of the word Lahar. And so the closest thing to it was avalanchia, which is avalanche. Mm. And they said, there's not even snow on the mountain. We know what an avalanche is. There's no way in hell that's going to happen. And so everyone ignored the warning. and the city, the thousands of people died. And so saying, instead of using terms like lahar, saying a giant mudslide with fast moving, faster than you can run, you know, might come down on you in 2 days. You need to leave. That explains the threat or the situation a lot better than an interpreter trying to find an equivalent word.
I gave a presentation and it was English. It was people who were practicing their English skills. And the first thing I had to do was define earthquake. So we had 2 slides on just what was an earthquake. So as I used it later, I knew they had the context. Yeah. I saw in the chat, when you pick your dates, man, I'll tell you, I'm in a group where we go through every cultural calendar when we're trying to pick event dates for, it's up at High Point, we do a spring fair, and you end up going, when's Ramadan, when's Easter, when's Labor Day, or when's Memorial Day, you know, and what day is early dismissal of school day, but you know, you learn what's going on in your community that way, for sure. And then Erica has a tip in there. I have not done that, so I'm gonna have to take that tip and see if we're gonna roll it into the guidebook somehow. I will tell you this guidebook, I haven't quite figured it out. I'll be giving you guys the link to the folder it's in, because I think it's gonna update about every month because everybody gives me new tips and tricks. So this is fantastic, but it's just like, it might look different every time you come to it because something new's been added. So any more comments on at the event and presentations? Let me see what's coming up.
Cindy, this is Erica about the 508 compliance. So the link or that tip I gave you, that is like super rigorous. 508 compliance is for basically like federal and state funded agencies. So you might find that you might not be able to meet all of them. Don't worry about that. That's like for government agencies. They have to meet that compliance. Right. But if you can meet most of them, you're like way ahead what most people will be doing.
Good point. A lot of what this is taken from is what does the city have to meet, which is also somewhat of that federal. And so, yes, we won't meet all of this because we're not funded to do all this. And so pick the ones that's most effective for your neighborhood and we'll figure out how to make that happen. So good point. This is the second slide around being at the event. You know, it gives you more checklists around the actual thinking about how if you have a functional need to be able to maneuver, how do you do a registration line? Do you put it in too narrow of an area where someone in a wheelchair can't navigate it? And the program activities is important because if somebody is on the autism spectrum and has problems articulating, you know, do you have a way that they can write, you know, or will people feel comfortable shouting out things to put up on the whiteboard? So you just think about maybe as we get used to this, we'll have better understanding of what is a kind of a universal setup that can handle almost any situation or any participant who shows up.
So Cindy? When I see registration, I think of people who may be uncomfortable with their immigration status in certain parts of the community. And what's a delicate way to go about that? Or would you talk with a community leader to see what they suggest? Or you're rep for that organization?
I've run into that one exactly. And it's like, please sign in if you would like to stay on our mailing list. If you don't, not a problem, right? That was one event where I used an online pre-registration so I could at least know when we maxed out the room. That's really what I was worried about.
Right.
And so what I did was I factored in that probably maybe X% would not go online and register. And I just made sure I cut off registration at the point where I thought the no-shows and the showed up without registering would balance out and I wouldn't have to turn people away the day of the event. Yeah, that doesn't happen very often that we're turning people away at the day of the event, but I was sending out the invitation to all of West Seattle for a 300-person room. So, you know, I was being optimistic. The room setup, there's tips in there about, you know, just making sure you use a sound system. I mean, we all kind of cheap out on that and don't, I hate using it, but you're doing a disservice to your participants, particularly anybody with hearing issues who doesn't even have hearing aids yet. And then thinking around the sign languages and can we use devices? And then I'm going to talk about this CART, C-A-R-T, which of course I won't remember the acronym. It'll be later in here, but it stands for caption assisted radio transmission or recorded transmission, I believe. And it's what you see on the screen there. She has got a computer and that woman is doing like court stenography. She's listening to me and she's typing as I say it, and it's being portrayed on the screen. So it's like Zoom closed captioning, but live up on the screen. So when you're doing the live events, that's what you have to hire to do. And we talked a little bit about kind of prepping your interpreters with what's the language set you're going to use and what's the topic, and making sure they understand what lahars are, for example. And she did the same thing. She wanted to see my materials that I was going to show up on the screen so that she could have it and be helping type, listening to me and being quicker at what was I really talking about. So that was an interesting experience. That was a very good. She came in and all I had to do was have the projector for her and the screen, and she was good to go. Okay, please go forward. There we go. So the tools that we've got on that, because a lot of the tips about how to do it are in the chapter before, but these are the actual, language access has got a great website. Contrast checker, I didn't talk about that, but when you're putting it together a presentation, there are some color combinations that don't give enough contrast for people with low vision to be able to really see what you've put up on the screen. So you can run it through this tool that says, yep, you've got enough contrast. And that's not just presentations, but your flyers as well, if you're doing anything in color. And then if you've got something that's going to help you walk through do I have a loop, or how am I going to set up my PA system? This is in the two screens. It's another picture of the West Seattle ones we had. And this is a different workshop where we had the card on the other side of the screen. And then that's the front view of what it looks like and how close she has to sit to the screen. So the last kind of in the event is, ending it. And you can't stop what you started at the beginning. If you invited different language speakers, and that was your target, and you've had people sign up, and that you had 40 people sitting in front of your interpreter, you need to continue to do your post-event communication in that language. You can't just walk away from it. So we tend to, like the first time I went through this, every time it was like, oh, geez, I didn't even think about that. So these are all the tips. Don't make these mistakes. Make sure you thank people in their language, however it's appropriate, for giving them your time and attention. We all know this, but those future next steps that relate to them are really important. So think about those when you run through your whole event and what is it doing and what are you accomplishing. I think then the next thing we go into is virtual events. So any questions about those physical events and the tool suite that you have available? Yeah, it's kind of, isn't it overwhelming? Yeah, right. It's just big. So then we get into doing all this virtually, because we started this back when it was all in person. And in fact, the month I was going to roll it out or really start having some focused discussion is when COVID hit. And it was like, we just don't even want to talk about having outside events. And so we all switched to virtual, and we've all sort of been struggling with just getting onto the virtual platforms to start with. But many of us, after about 4 or 6 months, went, okay, we got this now. Now, how do we apply all the stuff we're doing and all the stuff we want to do to reach out to our communities? If this was to go on for much longer, how would we do it in that virtual environment? So I'm going to show you this matrix that shows you the analysis we started doing. We use Zoom because that was the first thing we came to. It was cheap and it was easy to manage. And so I'll show you that matrix. But for under doing virtual events, there are ways to get American Sign Language, ASL accommodation via relay for more intimate meetings, you know, like if you're doing your hub group, and I know there's a hub that has a blind person, and I know there's a hub that's got a hearing impaired person. They can be linked into meetings by a free service called the Washington Relay Service. And they will have people who will do the closed captioning or translation for them as part of your meeting. That person has to request it. That's why it's more like the more working meetings than general broad, you know, community outreach meetings. But recognize that that's a way to enroll more people into being your hub volunteers, is because there are resources that will help us do that. So this is like, I think 3 pages long. And what we did was everything that is around accessibility and is an aid for accessibility is in bold. So as we went through each of these platforms, you know, there's the stuff that's typical, you know, you want it to be able to be recorded. You want more than 5 people on. They're just in normal font, but chat is really important for anybody who, you know, needs to communicate. If you can only articulate, you've possibly lost some people. And so chat has been important. And there's a coalition of people who help with emergency planning. And so we've sort of been talking to them, and I got this part of this list from them. These are all the different kind of platforms that are out there. And it just got exhausting because when I started, Zoom did not have closed captioning, and now they do. So it's kind of like, well, this was the time we did that, and I probably ought to put that in here, but you know, as of the start of 2021, and I literally just had to go in and update this because Zoom has now added closed captioning. A word of warning about that is that the disabilities community is not super keen on using closed captioning as your only way. They much prefer, if they're really, if they are American Sign Language people, to use an American Sign Language interpreter, because what is unknown to us people who don't do this normally is American Sign Language is its own language. It is not a word for word translation by the American Sign Language person. The ASL interpreter is speaking in another language that is unique and specific to the hard of hearing community. And so chat to them doesn't translate quite right because they use words and context that's not natural to them. So the recording option is good because you can always record it and go back and lay in tracks if you need to. Dial-in option is, you know, you have people who can't use computers, and so being able to dial in is important to them. And so closed captioning, what's the quality of the captioning? Like I said, that community has some definite opinions, and you know, I had to kind of finally say, I'm still collecting info because I get okay from one person and this was horrible from another. So just be aware. Turn on closed captioning when you're sitting in meetings. If you do a lot of Zoom meetings, turn it on and watch it, because you'll go, oh no, Teams, you know, good, bad, Zoom, good, bad. And you will also learn what screws up the captioning. You'll learn, I'm probably going too fast for the captioning. And if you don't have straight linear sentences, you keep branching off and you don't finish sentences, that really messes up the closed captioning. So you learn to speak good English this way too. Can you do the captioning in different languages? So Skype will let you close caption in different languages. You know, haven't tried it myself, but that's what I've been told. Team Live, now that's a fairly expensive one, but I don't know how many languages it does. Google Meet does 4. So, you know, that's a possibility if you're doing some, you know, maybe a small training session or something. Oops. Was there a question?
Yeah, this is Erica. Just, I wanted to talk about the language captioning. I've been testing out Google Meet, and I found it is very good. It can distinguish when there's 2 people talking at the same time. It knows how to caption them properly. And the other thing I have found is that it is, even if the person's video is cutting out and you're losing the audio, the captioning will still actually properly capture what they're saying.
Which one? Which platform?
Google Meet.
I have not tried that, so I'm going to need to try that. So thank you for that input.
Yeah, I think they use the same real-time translation technology that they do on YouTube, so it's pretty heavily used.
Okay. Great, good input. So, and then this is the rest of the stuff. Sometimes we care if you can do breakout sessions and polling and stuff like that, but that's not as essential for, including everybody for all their different capabilities. So I think we're almost done. So really, so you'll be able to see this tool set. You'll be able to kind of, work your way through the demographics. Call me if you have any problems. The 2020 census stuff is, somebody who's watching that website says they keep putting out little ticklers, but they haven't said when it's actually going to be published, but they're kind of thinking near the end of the year. That's going to make a big difference because in Seattle, a lot of our communities have changed and grown tremendously, and you really want to get the best sense of where you're at. And so all those same tools, once the census info comes in, the City of Seattle tools will get updated with the 2020 census. So, but it'll be a while. But at least pick out something which is clear and obvious to you. You know, if you have 42 stores that cater specifically to the Vietnamese community in your neighborhood, that's, probably a really good clue, not just that you got one Thai takeout eatery, but, really that there are people in your neighborhood living there and using the supermarkets just like they do, except they have specialty markets for them. That's clues that you can work off without waiting until the census comes out.
So Cindy, there's one other thing. When people sign in on the registration, so we can stay in touch with them, one of the things that we've done over here for a while is let them know how they can get in touch with us if they just want to sit down, like one face-to-face, couple people over coffee. If you want to take a half an hour, you're interested in it, you want to explore it, we're open, or one of us is open to do that.
That's great. Yep. Yeah, that helps with the worry about if I give my name, where's my name going to go, right? So as you are thinking through what have you done in the past and who have you attracted and who have you not attracted, now that you see who's in your neighborhood, pick one dimension. Just figure out something that you can do and actually really stick with it. And right now, if you're really going to do something, you're still stuck kind of with virtual because nobody's doing anything. But when we get, so you may not do an awful lot because I don't think very many hub captains are doing much programming virtually except for their close-knit hub members. But if you're going to do, community meetings, like let's say you've been asked to speak to X group, ask them that, say, do you need materials? Do you want me to bring handouts that are for visually impaired people where I've taken it up to 24 font and they get the handout that everybody else got in 10 font. The more we ask and make people say, oh yeah, that's right, we do have so-and-so who's hard of hearing, I'll make sure we get the PA system, for that. But when you can meet in person again, you'll be able to use this checklist to go through and think about what you can do. Pick those one or two dimensions and start making changes, because that's the only way you're going to figure out how to do this is to do a couple of small steps, pick one goal at a time. I, of course, did it completely backwards, and which is why I'm advising you to do small steps. Don't pick 3 languages and CART for your first session. It was an instant learning session, and I didn't do really great, but it was a great learning experience. We want to share back, and this is where the Hub Captain's email list, I hope you guys use that more than you have been with, hey, I did this outreach event, I learned this trick. Don't save it up for 2 months. Tell people, use the Hub Captain email list so that we can all make this a part of our natural learning and communicating and sharing that we do as Hub Captains.
So Cindy, let me just pop in real quickly with something. Out here in Miqua, it's been probably a year. Second Thursday, Franz N3HFS has a Zoom set up at his house. And we put the information out to Queen Anne Community Council, Queen Anne Block Watch Group, and we've had at least 3 regular people sit in on it. And the idea is just you do the outreach and you have the thing available for people who want to sit in. And we haven't we've had some steady people. We haven't had a lot of people. But we've used the Zoom for that, and Bill may want to comment on that, but it seems to work. And we have a little educational part, Stop the Bleed, about what that's all about. And anyway, it seems to work.
So that's kind of the question is, I can't guess everybody's neighborhood, but do you have any Spanish speakers who would like to be part of that conversation? And how do you accommodate them? Or how do you help people who are seniors and have low technology? If my mom was in your neighborhood and wanted to join you because she's blind and she hates the computer, she's never going to come to your meeting. We have to not do, we've mastered doing business online. We've become experts at that. And so great for you guys to having switched from the in-person to the virtual. And so now this is the test of expanding it between the people with computers in their home who speak English, who want to learn from your teaching, right?
Hey, thank you. I appreciate you presenting that tonight because that opened a lot of windows. Thank you.
Yeah. The last line is around paying for this. This is a tough thing. We raised some money at the Hub Captains Network so we could get our brochure translated, and we can do some of our signage for the hubs to get that translated. I have not. Anne is working through a professional company, and there's a discussion in here about where you go to get this translated. I live in High Point. It's got a high teen population. They're always looking for those kids to do something useful. So I've worked out an arrangement where for a stipend of like a Starbucks card or an Amazon card of X amount, we pay the teen to do the translation, right? So right now that's coming out of my pocket, and it's okay for now because it's just trying to experiment and figure this out. And what I hope to be able to give you guys more advice on is like, when I went to her and I said, I've got 6 signs that need to be translated, and here they are, here's what I'm willing to offer. I had kind of gone, well, this is 70 words and I paid a professional 30 cents a word. And so I'm going to go $25 gift certificate. And, so I'm going to find out if that's acceptable, or is that too low, or is that too high, or is $25 not worth the effort in today's environment? So the whole paying for it is just going to be a journey we all get to do. So that's again, another, we'll do after about 6 months, we'll do a what's everybody learning, confab, and, find out, compare tips on that.
Oh.
And so this is my get off the stage screen, pick one thing to enhance and do a program that's of high interest to seniors and use a loop system, right? That was exactly what happened to me. I had a lot of people who wanted to learn about a certain aspect of preparedness. Having the loop system was really good. They were just like, I got more compliments that they didn't have a problem. They didn't have to sit up in the very front or right next to the speakers. I've done a Hub 101 with a blind participant, and I didn't realize that until I walked in the room. So I learned some stuff about who do I have walk her around, because we do those exchange walk around and stand in front of it. And I describe what goes on at each station, and then they practice. And so we learned how to, have someone walk her through that. And if I'd known ahead of time, we could have had it, some other way to have the materials ready for her. I used the card at West Seattle. We've done a Hub 101 for Spanish. So that was where I got a lot of experience with the, speak a little bit, wait for the interpretation, pause for, at appropriate set points for questions, deal with the questions. The great thing was the interpreter for me that day was a kind of a sub hub captain at one of the hubs. And so when the question came up, he answered them. And I finally had to kind of go after about 3 questions, like, what are they asking? So I could keep up on what they were interested in. And then a lot of people have said, we really, really want to get our apartment residents involved in this effort, but we're having a hard time doing outreach to them. So maybe there'll be some tips in here about how to break into those buildings, how to work with the building managers to generate interest, how to adjust our message so that people who live in tiny, small apartments don't get told, store 470 cubic feet of water, right? So just, it's going to be learning on both sides for all of us. So pick something and work on it. So where I've put the guidebook is in the Hub Captain Google Drive, in Hub Captain Documents, PR and Outreach, and it's a folder called Whole Community Outreach Tools, and that allows me to upload the newest version without breaking a link. So just it's as short a link, as short a path as I can make it for you. I will send this document out to everybody, and I'm sorry, Erica, I probably won't incorporate the 2 changes I heard of tonight. I just want to get this out to you guys. And oops, and the bottom line was I gave this to, I did a practice session with another community group so that you guys would get the better version. And so ignore the last line on there. So any questions? I think that's the last one. That was a deep dive, a hard wash, a fire hose, all in the same one. So I might, if I am feeling frisky, I might create a poll, because I know who was here tonight, and say, what dimension are you thinking of working on? That's kind of hard on you. I might not do that, I guess, because you haven't had time to go look at the demographics in your neighborhood. But I'm just kind of curious if you're thinking of taking on the language versus the access versus functional needs versus the renters versus, seniors, like, what are you just generally thinking you might already know is in your neighborhood that you haven't done particularly good outreach to, and what would you improve on? But we'll see. Okay, I think I saw a flash on the chat, so let me stop sharing. Oh dear, more chats. Oh, thank you,
my
Ann.
gosh, Cindy. 2 thumbs up. Amazing.
Oh, good. And it came out at coherent, at least.
Oh,
I can't think of anything else. It's sort of like just get it out there and try it. It's really a dense document, and so that's why it's broken down into where am I and what am I doing, and let's go see what it says about that. So, all right, well then I will let you guys get your evening back. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very
All
much.
right.
Good job, Cindy. Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye,
Bye, everyone.
everybody.
Bye.
Still want to chat?
Yes.